Gabriella was sitting in a library, her eyes glued on a laptop in front of her, lost in the story she was trying to bring to life, but something just doesn't seem to click. Her friend Sally came to her, studied her for a while, and then said, "You know, you have been working on that novel for weeks now. It would be nice to seek for help." Gabriella continued to type on her laptop, as if whatever Sally had said wasn't directed to her. What about Miss Riley? She's not only a literature professor, but also a novelist. Gabriella looked up, the wheels turning in her head. Miss Riley? The Ice Queen? You think she'd give me the time of day? Sally chuckled, placing a comforting hand on Gabriella's shoulder. You're her favorite student. I'm very sure she will. Gabriella sighed, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. She knew Sally had a point. Miss Riley was indeed known for her high expectations and her no-nonsense attitude, but there was something about her that made the students strive to meet those expectations. Her sharp blue eyes could cut through the thickest of fog, and her critiques, while harsh, were always insightful. Reluctantly, she nodded. Okay, I'll ask her. The next day, after class, Gabriella approached Miss Riley's office with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The door was open, and she could see the professor sitting at her desk, surrounded by stacks of books. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stepped inside. "Miss Riley, can I talk to you about my novel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Riley looked up, a slight furrow in her brow. "Gabriella, I'm surprised you're still working on that. What seems to be the issue?" Gabriella took a deep breath, stepping closer. I can't seem to get past this one scene. It's like I'm stuck, and no matter how much I write or rewrite, it doesn't feel right." She held out a few crumpled pages, her heart in her throat. Miss Riley studied her for a moment, then gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Very well. Sit. Tell me about it." Her voice was firm but not unkind, and Gabriella felt a spark of hope. As Gabriella described her protagonist's emotional dilemma, she noticed a softening in Riley's expression. The professor leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers under her chin. "It sounds like you're trying too hard to force the plot," she said. "Sometimes, you need to let the characters breathe. Give them space to make their own choices." Gabriella nodded, feeling a little deflated. "I know, but I've never felt so blocked before." Miss Riley's gaze softened. "Writing is about feeling, not just thinking. Sometimes you need to step away and live a little before you can write something truly meaningful." She paused, then added, "How about we meet outside of class? Perhaps in a more relaxed environment, we can untangle this plot knot." The suggestion took Gabriella back, but she saw the genuine concern in her professor's eyes. "Okay," she agreed, her voice tentative. "Where will we meet?" Miss Riley glanced at her, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "How about my place this weekend? I can give you my full attention without the distractions of the university." Gabriella's eyes widened. "Your place? But isn't that a bit personal?" Miss Riley shrugged. "You want help with your novel, don't you?" Her tone was matter-of-fact, but there was a glimmer in her eye that suggested she was enjoying the surprise she'd caused. "Besides, it's not like I'm asking you to a candlelit dinner." Gabriella couldn't help but laugh. Okay, I'll come over." She scribbled down the address on a piece of paper, still feeling a little bewildered by the invitation. The weekend arrived, and with it, the looming visit to Riley's mansion. As she pulled up to the massive, ivy-covered gates, her heart pounded in her chest. What if she'd read the situation wrong? What if this was some sort of test? She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was here for her novel, not to overthink. The house was even more imposing up close, with its tall windows and grand arches. She walked up the cobblestone path, her sneakers crunching against the gravel, and rang the bell. It chimed through the house, echoing off the stone walls. After a moment, the door opened, and there she was, Miss Riley, dressed casually in a pair of jeans and a sweater, looking surprisingly less intimidating than she did in her usual formal attire. "You came," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and pleasure. Gabriella nodded, trying to hide her nerves. "I did. I hope I'm not intruding." Miss Riley waved a dismissive hand. "Not at all. Come in." The interior of the mansion was beautiful, but Gabriella could feel its coldness and lifelessness. The walls were lined with books, floor to ceiling, but there was little in the way of personal touches. They settled into a cozy study, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a cat curled up on a plush armchair in the corner. Riley offered her a cup of tea, which she accepted with trembling hands. The warmth of the liquid was a comfort as she began to lay out her story's troubles. Miss Riley listened intently, her gaze never leaving Gabriella's face. Her questions were sharp, probing the depths of the narrative and the motivations behind the characters. It was clear she wasn't just hearing the words, she was seeing the story unfold in her mind's eye. Gabriella found herself relaxing under her professor's scrutiny, the words flowing more easily than they had in weeks. She spoke of her main character's love for poetry and the way it shaped her understanding of the world, of the supporting cast of friends and family that surrounded her, and the plot twists she'd meticulously crafted. As she talked, she began to see her story in a new light, the potential it held, the threads she hadn't yet woven together. Miss Riley took a sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving Gabriella's. "You have a strong voice," she said. "But you have to stop holding back a little." The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation and brainstorming. They dissected plot points, debated character arcs, and sipped tea. The more they talked, the more Gabriella felt the walls between them crumbling. It was like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing the tender, human core beneath Miss Riley's stoic exterior. The sun had begun to set, casting an orange glow through the windows, and the study grew quieter. Riley stood, stretching out her legs. "Why don't we take a break?" she suggested. "I have a garden out back that's particularly peaceful at this time of day." Gabriella followed her outside, feeling the cool air kiss her cheeks as they walked through the manicured lawn. The garden was indeed tranquil, with a small pond that reflected the last of a light. The sound of water trickling from a stone fountain filled the silence between them. "It's beautiful," she murmured, taking in the sight of the blooming roses and the swaying willow trees. "It's where I come to think," Riley said, her eyes sweeping over the landscape. "Sometimes the quiet can be just as inspiring as the words of the greats." Gabriella nodded, feeling the serenity of the place seep into her bones. She watched as Riley's gaze lingered on the pond, the corners of her mouth tilting up in a rare moment of relaxation. It was a stark contrast to the stern, unapproachable woman she knew from class. As they strolled through the garden, the conversation turned away from the novel and towards their personal lives. Riley spoke of her travels and how much she enjoys them. "I find that new experiences, new places, they have a way of opening up the mind," she said, plucking a rose from a bush and handing it to Gabriella. "It's like they give you a fresh perspective on the world. Something you can't get from a book." Gabriella took the rose, twirling it in her fingers. "You're not much of a homebody, are you?" Riley chuckled, a sound that was surprisingly warm and rich. "I suppose not, but it's been nice having you here." Gabriella felt a strange twinge in her chest at the admission. "It's been nice for me too," she said, meaning it more than she wanted to admit. "Thank you for your help." Riley nodded, her gaze lingering on the rose in Gabriella's hand. "You're welcome," she said, her voice softer than it had been all afternoon. "Now go home, and don't forget what we talked about." Gabriella felt a reluctance to leave the warmth of the mansion, but she knew she had to. "I won't," she promised, tucking the rose into her pocket. "Thank you again." Riley walked her to the door, her hand on the small of Gabriella's back. The gesture was almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down Gabriella's spine. "Keep in touch," she said, her voice holding a hint of something more than just a professorial concern. Gabriella stepped outside, the chilly evening air a stark contrast to the warmth of the house. She looked back at Miss Riley, who had one hand on the doorknob, her other hand resting against the frame. "I will," she said, her voice a little breathless. "Thank you for everything." As the door closed behind her, the mansion seemed to exhale, the warmth of their conversation dissipating into the night. Riley leaned against the wood, watching the taillights of Gabriella's car fade into the distance. She felt a strange ache in her chest, one she hadn't felt in a long time. The house that once felt like a fortress of solitude now felt like a prison of loneliness. Walking back to the study, she noticed the cat had moved from its armchair to the spot where Gabriella had sat, as if claiming the warmth she'd left behind. The fireplace was still crackling, the room holding onto the vibrancy she'd brought with her. Riley couldn't help but feel a pang of regret that she'd allowed so few people into this space, into her life. The week that followed was a blur of emails and revised chapters. Each time Gabriella sent a new version of her work, Riley felt a thrill that was more than just academic pride. It was as if she were watching a butterfly emerge from a cocoon. The transformation was stunning. The characters grew bolder, the plot more intricate, and the emotions more palpable. On another meeting at the mansion, Riley found herself looking forward to their sessions more than ever. The house didn't feel as cold anymore. It was as if Gabriella had brought a piece of the outside world in with her, filling the space with her warmth and vibrancy. That day, they decided to work in the library, surrounded by the whispers of thousands of stories. Gabriella read aloud her latest chapter, her voice resonating in the vast room. Riley sat across from her, legs crossed, listening intently. She noticed the way Gabriella's eyes sparkled with excitement and how her hands animated her words. The scene was coming to life, the characters making choices that surprised even Riley. "That's it," Riley said, interrupting her flow. "That's the moment you've been searching for." Gabriella looked up, hope shimmering in her eyes. "You think so?" Riley nodded. "Your protagonist is finally letting go, making choices based on her heart rather than her fears. It's beautiful." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them was charged with something unspoken. Riley felt her heart quicken, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She cleared her throat, focusing back on the manuscript. "Keep going," she said, her voice a little gruffer than usual. The following week, the pattern continued. Their meetings grew longer, the conversation more personal. They'd laugh over a cup of tea, share stories of their past, and discuss the intricacies of human relationships. Riley found herself looking forward to these sessions more than she cared to admit. One evening, as they sat by the pond, the light playing off the water's surface, Gabriella turned to her. "Miss Riley," she said, her voice serious. "Thank you. You've not only helped me with my novel, but you've also helped me understand myself better." Riley felt a lump form in her throat. "You're welcome, Gabriella." Gabriella took a deep breath. "I know this might be weird, but would you like to go to dinner with me tomorrow? I mean, if you are free." Miss Riley was taken aback. Her eyes searched Gabriella's for a hint of jest. But all she found was earnestness. "Dinner?" she repeated, her voice a tad higher than usual. Gabriella nodded, a hint of a blush staining her cheeks. "Yeah, I know it's not much, but I'd like to thank you properly." For all your help and everything. Riley considered the invitation for a moment, her mind racing with the implications. All right, she said slowly, a small smile playing on her lips. But it's not a date, she added, trying to keep the situation professional. Gabriella smiled, but her heart was beating so fast. Of course not. Just two friends sharing a meal. But deep down she was kind of hoping it would be a date. The next evening, they met at a quaint Italian restaurant downtown. The warmth of the place was a stark contrast to the coldness of Riley's mansion. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air, and the soft murmur of conversations created a comforting hum. Gabriella had chosen the spot. It was her favorite, a place where she often retreated to write and eat her favorite dish. As they sat across from each other, the candlelight flickered on their faces, casting shadows that danced with the softness of their smiles. They talked about their week, their shared love of literature, and their favorite childhood memories. This feels more like a date than a friendly dinner, Riley said after a short silence. Gabriella just smiled and asked, "Would you like it to be a date?" Riley looked at her for a while as if studying her. "Are you sure you want to know my answer?" Her heart racing, Gabriella nodded. Riley took a sip of wine, her eyes never leaving Gabriella's. "I'd say yes," she said, setting the glass down with a gentle click. "But only if you're ready to handle the complications that might come with it." Gabriella felt a thrill run down her spine. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I've never felt like this about anyone before." Riley's gaze searched hers, looking for any hint of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she took a deep breath and reached across the table, taking Gabriella's hand in hers. "Then let's make it a date," she murmured. "A date it is," Gabriella said, her smile growing wide.